Yeah, and thanks everybody. I want to keep this pretty informal, so this is what you do if you have a question. Don't wait till the end. Whenever you have a question, if you do, just raise your hand and we'll interrupt there. All I'm going to say about Hyperion Research is that we are a vendor-neutral market analyst firm specializing in high-performance computing market wherever it goes. And so I'm not going to be talking about Panasys, and I'm not going to be talking about any other vendor here. I'm going to be talking about a topic that we did a study on, sponsored by Panasys, and that's on total cost of ownership for HPC storage systems. That's what this talk is about. So these are kind of the goals. The idea was to look at TCO, and that's not such an easy thing to do because in other studies we've done over the years, when we've asked people about TCO, whether it's in storage or in practically any other part of the HPC ecosystem, we get a different answer from practically every site that uses how they define TCO. So what we did here very deliberately was just to use the TCO and let them define it any way they wanted. But really the point was to contrast what happens in the beginning, which is paying money for an HPC storage system, and what happens living with that storage system. So anything after that point, as defined as TCO. And we really wanted to look at how simple are these systems to manage, to install, manage, and so forth. And that's kind of the main point here. We talked to 50 sites, and around the world, and as you'll see, the demographics were pretty representative of what's in the marketplace. And you think, well, 50 sites, that's not maybe all that many. But what we found with studies of these kind is we do a lot of very much larger studies too, especially for the government. And there's pretty good correlation between studies of this size and larger ones. So just going through the demographics here pretty quickly to let you know who we talked to. I got to use it's a little bit of an eye test here on the thing here, but what you see here is that there is a good spread of numbers of employees, the company sizes where employees are concerned, and there's also a good representation of the three main global regions, EMEA, the Americas, Asia Pacific, and those numbers are not far away from the actual share of spending on HPC storage systems around the world. Annual revenue is also a good spread. Strangely enough, it might seem, this is the pattern that we see very, very often. It's bifurcated, whether it's for the computers or the storage systems. There's a whole lot of spending kind of at the lower end, and then there's a whole lot of spending at the higher end. And the market sectors are there, government, industry, academia, also a pretty representative split. Storage capacity and growth, large range. I mean, I never thought I'd been in this sector, working in this sector for quite a while, with companies, Cray, SGI, others. And I didn't really expect to see some people with storage capacities of over 100 petabytes, but there are some out there now. And the growth is, for most people, is kind of in the 11% to 25% a year. It varies. But that's a pretty high growth rate. Any questions so far? Okay. Okay, now we kind of get into the meat of the thing a little bit more. And, what's the most important driver of it? And, it turns out that the single biggest driver, most frequently, is iterative methods, the growth of iterative methods. And we're talking about, I'm telling you what you already know, we're talking about things ranging from parametric modeling in the manufacturing sector to stochastic methods in financial services, the Black-Scholes, Monte Carlo stuff, to ensemble methods in weather and climate. But definitely iterative methods are really, really driving storage growth. But next up, no surprise, is advanced analytics, AI, and other things related to advanced analytics. Very, very important driver now. And those things are not separate from each other. simulation and analytics kind of go together. We just finished a report for the government, which is we're allowed to mention the title, and that's about it, which is, it's a manual, an AI primer for senior US military leaders. And this was one of the big themes, is that just about all the economically important AI use cases, precision medicine, automated driving, smart city stuff, Internet of Things and so forth, just about all of those benefit from both simulation and analytics. So simulation is not, simulation is not going away. Simulation is growing about as fast as the analytics side of things in AI and related things. I saw a study recently, Rand Corporation did a study, and they said that it would take, to get 95% consumer trust in fully automated vehicles when they come along, they figured that would take 8.8 billion miles of physical road testing, and that would take about 400 years, right? So this is a big analytics problem, and the only way to cut that down to between 5 and 10 years, they estimate, is with simulation, right? So those two things go together. Precision medicine is the same story. Simulation and analytics go closely together. So those are kind of the two big drivers, and then of course you get things that are separate, like non-iterative simulation is also an important driver, for example. Now, what's the most important purchase criterion for an HPC storage system? And you're not going to be surprised by the first two up there: performance of the system, however they measure it. And the second one is the price. And those have been things, as you know, those have been true forever and ever. But look at the third one, tied with price: long-term value. And they were not just kind of throwing that out there. They are looking for that. Things have really, really changed in just the past 5, 6, 7 years for buyers of HPC storage. 5, 6, 7 years ago when we did these studies, we would ask, how confident are you that you understand the storage part of HPC to the extent that you understand the compute part? And the answers were not too, in a lot of cases, you get government customers that know as much about storage and have forever as any vendor, and more in some cases. But most of the people back then said, we're not that confident. We nod our heads a lot when people are telling us about the details of their products, but because we don't want to seem dumb, but we don't always know what they're talking about. That's not so true today. People storage has become very, very important. It is the fastest growing part of the HPC ecosystem, and people have really focused on it a whole lot more. So operational challenges, as was mentioned a bit earlier, the biggest one is people. Just finding the right people, training the right people is really, really a difficult task for many of the sites. And then another one is, installation and tuning and so forth. And we'll put a little more perspective on this in the coming slides, but the people part is the biggest one. Oops, did I go the wrong way? I think I did. So then these are kind of the three aspects that people most frequently mentioned in conjunction with this vague term, total cost of ownership. There's a people part, there's a productivity part, and there is an operational part to that. And so how many staff do people have dedicated to HPC storage system? Most often 1, 2, or 3 folks. And how much are you spending on that? Most often, 100,000, 200,000, or 300,000. So it's sort of like I sense there's a correlation, although we didn't look at that, between the number of people and the salary outlay. This is the productivity part. It's how many times has this a problem with the storage system affected your productivity? And people are saying that 1 to 5 times, 40%, 4 out of 10 or something like that are saying that. 6 to 10 times, so you got like 65% or so forth are kind of like 2 to 6 times and so forth. That's actually a lot, for having problems like that. And then how often does it happen? Quite a few of them are saying on a monthly basis or about once a month, we're having a problem that affects productivity, some more often. And what is the impact of this? Well, there's clearly is a cost to it. For a single day, when a system is down, you're looking at, typically it's less than $100,000 in measurable cost, money part. And sometimes, but it can be for a few folks over $1 million a day for some of these places. But as you all know very well, loss of productivity isn't just a dollar kind of a thing. When you have researchers or workers, highly paid, highly skilled workers who can't have access to the system and are idle for even a day, that can be a really big challenge. And then on the operations side, sorry, I'm kind of looking this way because it's very small on the screen. On the operations side is how long does it take to install the system? You can see there, normally it's a couple of days to a week or so, people are telling us. And how long does it take to tune or retune? A third, well, the other, that 37% other, are people who in prior slides said we don't ever retune. So there is a crowd that doesn't have to do that, but usually it's, again, a couple of days, maybe 3 or 4 days sometimes. And so kind of get to any questions at this point or comments from this crowd? So don't be shy. So key findings are that the biggest growth drivers here are iterative simulation, number one, and then very data-intensive, newer kinds of workloads. I mean, data-intensive computing has been with us forever and ever. Machine learning dates back to the 1950s, but we all know that something's happened in recent years, and the importance of data-intensive computing is really growing pretty quickly. And in fact, we do a forecast on that for government and other customers about every couple of months. It's gotten to be very, very important. And as you can imagine, for the data-intensive computing site, the more the sites kind of focus on that, the more they're also focused on storage. No surprise. The growth inhibitors are the people part more than anything else, just finding the right kinds of people and training them in and so forth. And then for total cost of ownership, again, this is tied for the second most important criterion for purchasing today on average among these sites. And that's a big change, so forth. So it means they're really, really, really looking out there at what's at what the vendors tell them is happening after the point of purchase. Reliability. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question for the group.
Yeah.
Because this is
how many folks who are involved with purchasing HPC storage systems, and I know some of you are, how many of you have noticed a change where there is more attention to these kinds of factors when considering which systems to buy than, say, 5, 6 years ago? Are you noticing? Have you noticed a change there where you're really looking farther out? Is there more data to look at? Are vendors talking more about it or not more about it? Any comments there? It's going to be secret.
Along those lines, some of the data that you're showing, maybe you can even see if it jives with what people are experiencing. There's like 2 out of every 3 sites experience a monthly and weekly failure in storage. And I saw, NERSC says our uptime is not even 1.9. So is this acceptable, I guess, to certain types of people? It looks from your survey, performance and price performance are number 1 or number 2. Then things like uptime and manageability are way down the list. So is that okay with everyone? It sounds like it is, because
in just talking with some of the sites, there's a lot that is tolerable. There's a lot that's tolerated. It doesn't mean that people are super happy.
Why is it tolerated? Because that's what they...
Because what they say is because we don't know, they're not super familiar with every one of the offerings that's out there in the marketplace in many cases. Again, some of them are. Some of the government sites know
more than we do.
Yeah, more than anybody does.
Yeah.
But if you look more broadly, what you find is a lot of sites that say we really don't know, we're not in a good position to really judge and compare what various vendors have to offer. And so, maybe this is the best we can get.
Steve, I would say this.
Hey, Bob, can you throw him the...
I'm not going to help the...
you don't want to...
I can speak.
Yeah, he's good.
Yeah, they just they want to pick it up on the film.
Okay. This feels really weird. Yeah.
Just talking to the
I
cube.
don't know how I feel about this, but I wouldn't say that we find it tolerable per se, but we know that it's part of the game, right? If you're going to be doing this with equipment and people, you're going to have outages, and you have to know how much of those outages is acceptable. You will always have outages and downtime and slows, and you
How do you decide as an organization what is tolerable and what isn't tolerable? Is that based on history, or what is it?
It's based on history and how much money we've lost during the outages. So the business will make very sure that we're aware that that last outage just cost us 1.2 mil.
Well, can you continue just a little bit? Can you talk about how important is this issue? I mean, even for your organization, I mean, is this considered kind of a trivial issue, or is it considered a very important issue?
It's part of the reason we make purchasing decisions, right?
Yeah.
We make them not only for the initial price performance, which everybody does, but we look for that robustness, that longevity, and the easy to maintain factor.
Yeah.
Without having a better way to put that.
And the last thing I would ask you is, so how have you seen this, if you've seen this change in the last 5, 6, 7, whatever years, just the kinds of scrutiny that you give to systems when you're considering them, or on the other hand, the amount of information that's even available from the vendors for you to consider?
So a lot of it actually plays out during our testing. It's real easy to see where we're going to have issues.
Okay.
But the rest of it is just networking and talking to our peers that actually use that technology in their facilities and getting their feedback and understanding. Because clearly the vendor's going to tell you they've built the best thing since sliced bread, and that you cannot live without this particular product, whatever it might be. But at the end of the day, you have to do your research.
And it's usually better than sliced bread?
Not quite up to sliced bread.
Okay.
And this cube is weird.
It really is. Does anybody else want temporary ownership of the
Hey,
cube.
Steve, I have a follow-up question. Only one current user said they feel like they have a good handle on some of the softer costs. So, Greg, is that cost captured by procurement, CFO's office, in the business unit? Where does that happen? Because it's a big cost. It's important to us for obvious reasons because we think that's a huge advantage for us. But when it comes down to quantifying it, I think we've got to do a better job of helping our current users and future users of quantifying it. So I'm interested in where that happens in your org.
Well, it's our organization, but it all depends on how you build out different things. Like, pay a certain amount per rack for one in the data center, right? The cost associated with that. So it all depends on how those things are built or built to divvy up based on different things.
Okay. All right.
When it comes down to, for our internal service, it comes down to, I guess all those costs roll to us.
And does procurement take that into account when they do their final analysis? How about for you guys?
Where
Hey.
small amounts, there is no procurement.
Yeah, you do it or it doesn't get done, right? Yeah.
I do want to register a complaint that he didn't have to use the cube, though.
That's been noted and he will have to later.
Everyone uses the cube. Okay. Any other comments on this topic? Yep. Do you want the cube or you down?
Doesn't really matter. So look, I think a lot of it is they forget in the next procurement all the problems that you've had versus all the promises that they're going to give you.
Why is that?
You know, I don't know, but in the three items that are there, TCO would be ideal to consider. But again, it all boils down to how much does it cost? And this is the amount that I have. Does it meet the requirements? Well, you got 30 days to prove it to me, okay? And it met the requirements. Yeah, it stayed up for 30 days, but over the next couple of years, that's really where the rubber meets the road, right? Because depending on the system, some systems will go down almost every month, and others will stay up. And we've had some luck with a certain vendor who is very present here, and we've had really good luck there. And the alternative we've always struggled with and continue to struggle today. So
And is there, and I don't mean only in your case, but is there pressure from up above sometimes to just go for the lowest cost vendor as opposed to one that you've had better experience with?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right,
And-
yeah.
and-
They don't take into account, for example, in the, when you have a very high-performing storage environment and you only have one person that's actually doing the maintenance of that system, and most of the time on a part-time basis, that person is actually being used for something else
Okay.
that's just as valuable,
Yep.
right? Or more valuable than having to care for a storage system.
Yeah, because there's sort of there's only two more things. One of them is the satisfaction and loyalty thing where the results could be seen as counterintuitive because 82%, some very high percent, said that they were either very satisfied or somewhat satisfied with their current storage vendor. And yet something like almost 40% said, yeah, we're very likely to switch next time around. So pretty happy with who they're using right now, but some real openness to looking at others in the future. I mean, we don't kind of know more than those results, but some of you might. I mean, does that make any sense? Does that seem crazy to you that there would be those two very different results for satisfaction with the current vendor, but openness to looking at other vendors? Any comments there? Do you want to say anything again?
So again, it all comes down to the features that are available at the time that you're procuring something, right? So yeah, you might have had some bad luck with your older file system or storage environment, but you're doing okay right now with whatever you got. But you're procuring something new.
Yeah.
And in that procurement, something new, now you're being offered, oh, that problem that we had before no longer exists, or we're going to get these other features that we really like to have, but the current vendor isn't really ready with those new features that really could put them forward.
Is any part of
It's a
that
leapfrogging game.
Is any part of it that the whole requirements set is changing rapidly enough that sites feel obligated to look at, even if they're pretty loyal to and happy with the current vendor, that next time around they really feel they need to look around?
Well, the only thing I can say to that is that in some cases, the customer really has an obligation to look at more than one vendor and try to spread the wealth, so to speak.
Okay. Anyone else on that one? You can use mine if you want.
I think there's another factor that maybe should be considered, but also depends on the organization and what the business drivers are. And oftentimes, unfortunately, the enterprise side of IT computing tends to look at things in HPC very differently and wants to push and push and push. So that's another huge factor. But we do due diligence every time we have to buy storage, and it's always an uphill battle to convince, was this the right solution for HPC workloads? There's a lot of questions that are being asked.
And let me hand it right back to you. Is that because there's not a good understanding that HPC workloads may have some different requirements from the enterprise workloads that the senior management is used to?
Yes, that is true. And a lot of folks there don't really understand parallel file systems and the real benefits that it provides for scientific computing, for example. So they live in the enterprise world and recommend some cheap solution that really won't work. So.
And Steve, no, not a question, just a comment on your satisfaction and loyalty. You'll find out from our presentations that we've been a Panasys customer since 2004. But every year we probably bring through 4 storage vendors. We're very much a trust but verify kind of organization. So while Panasys is doing fantastic and we still love the product, always check to see if someone else is doing something better.
Okay. Makes sense. Any other comments on that one? Okay, we're almost done. And then, and the other thing is that we asked, do you care whether the storage system is offered by a dedicated storage vendor or whether it's coming through, say, an HPC systems vendor? And the answer in most cases is no, we don't really care. They said we don't so much care there. And of course, that response, at least in the aggregate, is kind of biased by the fact that a lot of this separate purchasing of storage, not with the system, is additions to an existing storage system over time, so forth. So anyway, those are the results of the study, so thanks for listening to this. And I guess I would just say, are there any other comments in summary or reactions that anybody has?
Steve, would you have some summary recommendation to a storage buyer based on this data? What kind of would be your summary?
See, I paid him to do that. I think this the summary has to do, for at least for me, from this study, has to do with the most important thing that was mentioned consistently in this study is the difficulty of finding enough talented people. You know, that's really the most difficult issue of all, as at least according to the respondents to this study. And this is a problem that exists across the entire HPC ecosystem and across the entire world as the sort of number one problem. There just aren't enough people coming, qualified candidates coming out of graduate programs and so forth. And there are whole separate studies have been done, not just by us, by others too, that kind of look at this and make recommendations and so forth. And the recommendations are very specific, but to kind of like flash forward to the finish, the summary is most all these studies say that, oh, you know, the companies have to work more closely with universities, and the universities say, no, this is really tough, because if somebody's in an engineering program or a computer science program, there are so many requirements that it's very, very difficult to kind of wedge more requirements into those programs. So it's kind of been a standoff, not just in the US, but around the world. There are some universities that really have broken through, like the Technical University of Munich says you cannot graduate in an engineering or a technical or even a scientific domain without gaining competency in high-performance computing. Not just one course. So they actually have like 1,200 people, students in this sub-curriculum for high-performance computing, but that's pretty hard to do. Anything else? All right, thank you very much.